semesters.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I know, I was.
We're very excited to be here for another Student Achievement Committee on this Wednesday, December 6th. It is 3 p.m. and we will call this committee meeting to order. It is wonderful to look over and see so many of our esteemed staff members here with us today, and our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Stacy Wilson-Norman, has cultivated a very robust agenda for us this afternoon. And before we get to these important topics, I will entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our November 1st meeting.
So moved.
Have a motion, have a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries, and so we are pleased to hand it over to Dr. Wilson-Norman to take us through some important updates, and so thank you.
We are excited to bring to you today our annual update on promotion and retention in alignment with Board Policy 3420. We hope today to be able to highlight some of the data that aligns to our retention and promotion work, but also think about the strategies that are in place to prevent those students who need additional enrichment and intervention and support. While we feel like we have strong interventions and we hope to showcase some of that during this presentation, we also recognize that there are opportunities for us to retool some of our practices as we begin to address the data by subgroups with more tailored and designed approach to help address some of those data points. That we work closely with our research and accountability team, and they're still working on individual data by school, but we do have the overall data. Mr. Cook would be here with us today, but he was tapped for jury duty, so he is doing his duties as a citizen, and so he may come in late, but that's where he is today. So we have with us Sarita Smith and John Williams, as well as Dr. Brad McMillan, who will take us through this presentation today.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Sarita Smith, Senior Director of Elementary School Programs. Good afternoon to Vice Chair Waters and board members. We're excited to be here today to give you an update on promotion and retention. With me I have John Williams, who is our Interim Senior Director of High School Programs. So today we have 4 desired outcomes. We're going to share state and local policies, district data, and district guidance on promotion and retention. Finally, we will give you an overview of the available supports that we offer to schools to help students who may need interventions. So the first priority within the strategic plan is student knowledge and skills, and listed here are some critical components to the knowledge and skills that were most important to our community. This includes the 4 C's and important literacies that ensure students are prepared to lead productive lives. 3 goals live within this priority: graduation, proficiency, graduation rates, proficiency, and growth. Our graduation rate goal is 98% of our students will graduate prepared for a complex and changing world. We will eliminate disparities by race, ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic status. This 98% target was chosen with much deliberation to balance ambition and feasibility. Ultimately, our goal is no dropouts. Every student deserves to graduate from high school. Our proficiency and growth goals are equally ambitious. We will need to take bold action to increase our proficiency to 90%, which would make us far and away the highest performing district in the state. Eliminating disparities by subgroup is a critical part of us reaching this goal. We want to ensure that 90% of our schools are exceeding the state average for growth, while ensuring that all student subgroups exceed in growth as well. We're aiming for excellence and equity. So it all starts with high-quality core instruction for all students in all content areas, and we have 3 aims to support this priority and make it a reality. So Section G1 of Board Policy 3420 outlines specific reporting requirements. These include the number and percentage of students retained or who are not meeting grade level standards, the number and percentage of third grade students exempt from mandatory retention under the Read to Achieve law, and remedial education opportunities provided by the school system to foster promotion. So at this time, Mr. McMillan will lead us through some district data.
Thanks. You want to hand that? Thanks, sir. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to share a few slides here with respect to that policy requirement that we obviously have, which dovetails also with state law. I'm using the term on this slide non-promotion rate because these data were pulled from the state, and even though our policy says retention, the state uses the term non-promotion, the same thing. And what you see on this chart here is about the last decade or so of the non-promotion rate in grades K through 13 for us here in Wake County, which is represented by the orange line, and also for the state as a whole, just to give you some benchmark in terms of how that number is situated. The blue line there is the number for the state as a whole. The 2023 number, you'll notice we don't have one for the state. They have not released it yet, but the 2023 number that we've got there is basically our best estimate based on the internal data that we have of what our retention rate will be for the district once it is finally released by the state. And so that's a fairly hard number, but it's not out there yet in the state on the state's website. And so if you look at the trend, you see a couple of things become obvious here. Number one, we've generally run a little bit lower than the state in terms of our propensity to retain students over the last decade or so, and it's pretty much followed kind of a parallel track there from 2014 all the way until now. The other thing I'll point out is that both us and the state were making some pretty serious progress in eliminating retentions for several years until that thing happened there in 2020 in the pandemic. You'll see a little bit of a kind of almost an artificial dip there in 2020. You may remember that was the year when kind of come March, everything sort of shut down. And a lot of grace was given to a lot of students at that point because of the situation that we were going through. So I think probably that's what's responsible for the dip there, is just sort of giving a lot of students the benefit of the doubt given the tumultuous circumstances and the difficult instructional environment that we had. And obviously that was true for everyone in the state. So we both kind of tipped down. And then the following year was 2021, and you'll remember that's the year where we started in remote instruction, and our elementary and middle school kids started to rotate back right before the holidays. And then after the holidays, there was a spike in cases, and everybody went remote again. And our high school kids didn't even start face-to-face instruction until March of that year. So they spent about the first 3 quarters of the year in remote instruction. And you can see there was a concomitant spike there in the percentage of kids who were retained at the end of that year. And then since then, it's been kind of coming back down and settling back down into more of that 2 to 3% pattern that we saw prior to the pandemic. And there's a link down there on the bottom where those data are available on the state's website, again, with the exception of the 2023 data for us. In addition to looking at it overall, it's, I think, really instructive to look at it by grade level as well. This is just our data. This is not the state. This is just us. And there's a lot of lines and a lot of numbers on here, but basically a couple of takeaways. Number one, you can see that almost all retentions occur at the high school level, particularly in grades 9 and 10. Over the past decade or so, that's been consistently true. A little bit of a larger number in kindergarten as well. And so that historical pattern has been very consistent over the last decade or so. However, I've put some dashed lines in there for the data from the last 4 years to indicate which of those years were pandemic years. And that trend that you saw on the previous chart, where we had a dip in 2020 and then a spike in 2021 and then sort of a settling down the next couple of years, is also evident here, particularly at the high school level, where you can see that red line was the low point in 2020, big spike, coming back down, coming back down. So that same pattern we saw on the previous chart is true on this grade level chart as well. Now, there's a lot of numbers on here, but there is one that I want to pay particular attention to here, and that is if you go down to 2021, the third row from the bottom, and you work your way all the way over to 9th grade, you can see 16.1. 16% of our 9th graders in 2021, that year where we had the spike across the whole state, ended up repeating 9th grade, at least for some portion of the following year. They reported back to school in the fall of 2022 as 9th graders. Fast forward to this year, that is this year's graduating class. of seniors. So given how much higher that retention point was compared to all of the previous ones, one of the things that we've been preparing for sort of the last couple of years is that what that's impact that's going to have on our four-year graduation rate this year, because that is a particularly large number. It's not just going to be us, it's going to be the whole state. Because obviously for those kids to get back on track, high schools had to get them some extra support, which they have been doing over the last few years very diligently to try and get them caught back up. However, we also know that a lot of the students that were retained that year have actually left the district. And so as to whether they got caught up, say, in Franklin County or Johnston County or wherever they may have gone, we don't really know that yet. There's a big quality control process that comes with calculating our graduation rate that occurs usually in the spring of the year, so right after the holidays here, that will crank up all around the state, and numbers will start to solidify a little bit more. So we don't really know what the impact is going to be on our graduation rate, but we know it will not make it go up. Because students who were retained in ninth grade have a much lower propensity to graduate on time than obviously students who moved straight from ninth to 10th grade. So we're sort of bracing for the impact of that. It's sort of like a little rogue wave that's been out at sea here for a couple of years since the pandemic started and was so disruptive. It's now finally making its way ashore 4 years later as those students become the graduating class of the spring of 2024. In addition to that, we've also got some data here on this slide that show you a little bit of a breakdown by some of our subgroups of who those students are who are generally retained or not promoted at the end of a school year. And these data are internal for us from 2023, and it shows by ethnic group how those rates are broken out. And you can see that our Black, African American, and Hispanic Latino students are much more likely to be in that retained group than are some of our other subgroups, about 4 to 5 times more likely. If you add up the numbers there of the 1247 and the 1485 for those two subgroups, among the 3707 students who were retained this year, 75% of them were either Black, African American, or Hispanic Latino. So then thinking back to the chart I just showed about the ninth grade retention rate, not only will that impact our district as a whole, but it's probably going to have a little bit of a disparate impact on some of our subgroup graduation rates as well, because those students are so heavily overrepresented in that group of students who's typically retained, particularly at that ninth grade spot, which is where the majority of our retentions occur every year.
Would this
Yes.
be a good breaking point to see if there are any questions?
Yeah, because the next slide is really more about read to achieve, which is a little bit, while it's still part of the reporting policy and is really about retention, it's a little bit more of a narrow scope. So yeah, I'd be happy to take questions at this point if you want to have them.
I see Mr. Hershey.
Is the 8th, 9th grade rate change, is that go back far beyond 2014? Is that always, in the world of education, been the point where a lot more students are retained?
Yeah, I think historically ninth grade has always been sort of that point, because once you get out of middle school, you get to the point where you have to accumulate credits in order to move from one grade to the next. And in some cases, it's even certain kinds of credits. For example, like an English 1 credit or whatever, whereas some of those earlier years, prior to ninth grade, in order to get promoted, you have to have a birthday. So it becomes a little bit more complicated at the high school level in terms of how we operationalize what it means to be in the ninth grade or in the 10th grade. And then also the difficulties of the transition sometimes from 8th to 9th grade in terms of self-management and some of the other things that kids have to do to be able to sort of move from that middle school environment, which probably feels a little more like elementary, to the big high school environment where you've got tons of class changes, different teachers in every period, different classmates in every class. It's just from an adjustment perspective, that's
So
always been
from a data perspective or from any perspective, have we identified specific traits, roadblocks for these kids when they get to ninth grade, and how we, and the follow-up to that, which may not be the scope of this conversation, is how are we systematically going through those roadblocks to lower those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some select high schools that have tried some specific programs, like freshman academies, where kids come in over the summer and kind of help get their feet wet with like what it means to be a ninth grader and how it's going to be different and that sort of thing. And they've had some sporadic success with that sort of thing. I'd probably defer to Dr. Williams on, maybe because of his longer history here in the district at the high school level, about what the programmatic strands have been that have really been trying to target that and what skills we're looking at.
Yeah, I'll add, we've done some structural solutions to the problem.
I'll give you one. Most of it is through strategic scheduling, so we can look at data points when the students get to us pulling from 8th grade and prior grades. And rather than just throw them into the mix of master schedule, we can strategically put cohorts of students together, put the interventions they need in place, and reduce class sizes. So there are many strategies we've done over the years to try to deal with this problem. It's as if for the many grades, they have been promoted by somebody else opening the outside gate. When students get in our high schools, they often have to open the gate from the inside, and it's a different learning for them. I'll give you one data point. We once did a study in our district, Dr. McMillan can talk about, that could predict graduation rate by looking at 3rd grade literacy rates. And so one of the key predictors of success in the 9th grade is reading, and they're all connected.
That was sort of going to be going down the path of my last question, which is, do we focus more on 8th grade and what we're doing in 8th grade as to prepare? Because clearly, I mean, that's just a different strategy.
Yes.
And changing the way we do 8th grade.
Yes. So again, I think mostly through literacy strategies.
Okay.
We work with that, and we have other specialists at the middle school such as instructional facilitator and some other positions that can help with that process.
Mr. Swanson, followed by Dr. Amy.
So I think my question is very similar to, along the lines of Mr. Hershey. Some of the mechanisms that we have put in place, such as the high dosage tutorings and other community initiatives that we have helped to address some of the gaps during the pandemic, are we seeing some of that success as it plays out to the data that's being presented? If not, what other mechanisms can we potentially put in place as a board to help support our students?
Our next presentation will be the high dosage tutoring. We are seeing some success, but as we begin to think about some of the challenges of when students are retained in 9th grade, it's things like attendance, previous failures, and so we put some different things in place, but again, we recognize that there are some additional things that need to be put in place. This year, they've put in place objective recovery so that before a child fails, that we can intervene and help them bring up their grades before they fail, but also thinking about once a child fails and they need to recover or catch up with their cohort, first-time credit. And so really looking at how we do credit recovery, how we intervene ahead of time. But as we think about particular subgroups, we really need to begin to think about, I think, to Mr. Hershey's question, that early warning tracking system of what is the profile of the child. Is it never passing the EOG, multiple attendance issues, previous failures, really beginning to think about this child, if we don't intervene at some point, may be on that what they call the 9th grade bubble. And so those are things as we begin to look at and build out kind of our instructional plan that we have to address to really deal with the 9th grade retentions at this level.
If I can follow up to that, just to touch on the last part about attendance, because I know my time in the classroom, attendance was always an issue. How are we communicating with families that attendance may be one of those mechanisms that will hold a student back from the 9th grade? And along the lines, are we getting that information to parents during that transition from 8th grade to high school so they're aware that high school is going to look a little different, especially now since the pandemic, things look completely different. And with the credit recovery piece, I used to tell my students there's no 5th quarter. So if you fail 1st quarter, we give you your academic recovery plan, same for 2nd and 3rd. 4th quarter, there's literally no 5th quarter to help you bounce back. So how are we helping those students? Because a lot of students during my time in the classroom relied on that academic recovery for the first 3 quarters, and then if they failed the EOC, failed the class, then they were right back. And we often know it's many pieces that goes along with that, why they're, couldn't make it or why they couldn't pass those courses. It could be the style of the teacher and whatnot. So I'm just trying to make sure that we are thinking through all of that. So again, our students are not in a surprise when they are looking for that academic recovery plan for that 4th quarter.
I think it is really even looking at how we will do high school, summer school a little bit differently. We have a new credit recovery tool, Edgenuity, in which you can do it online, students can work. And so thinking about how do we make those things available to students over the summer. And so the real goal is to try to intervene before they fail and then get them back on track as quickly as possible and deal with the issues of attendance. And I think that to your first question, I think we do communicate about attendance, but I think after the pandemic, retooling some of our efforts to really make sure that parents really understand the importance of when a child misses 20 days in an EOC course that is semester long, what that might mean. And so I think just scaling that up, another opportunity to enhance our response after the pandemic. So I think we do that, but can we do more? Yes.
Ms. Hopwell, Susan?
Yeah, so I was thinking the same thing with Mr. Hershey, in terms of what the 8th grade, what would happen if we focus that attention on the 8th grade, and that whatever the transition is that changes between 8th grade and 9th grade, what factors that may be that causes the retention issue. And I was also curious, are there other school districts where they have like 9th grade centers that does that spike shift to the 10th grade? I was just curious about that.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
There are definitely places that have kind of freshman academies, 9th grade centers, and we have to really study the data to see, the longevity of it, but it does help in 9th grade. And I think looking at how do you do a freshman academy, sometimes we call it a freshman academy, but kids are still going in the same setup as before, but in a true freshman academy, they're not intermersed, there's less transition, those sorts of things. So I think us just really evaluating what are some strong strategies and what are the resources that are already in place and what may be needed for us to begin to, as research, data and accountability determines which schools, how do we begin to think about which schools do we target to really focus on reducing that 9th grade retention levels?
Yeah, just just preparing the students, preparing the parents at the 8th grade level on the responsibilities, the commitment to showing up and all those things that are hopefully will reduce that spike, right?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The research on 9th grade academies is kind of a mixed bag, and part of it is because what that looks like has been so different in so many places. In some places, it's just that's the 9th grade hallway, right? But like the fundamental experience is not really any different, all the way to the point of, in some cases, separate facilities where you have just a really unique kind of experience just for those kids. So I think the devil's in the details as far as.
And plus, it's already consequential at 9th when you start 9th grade. So it's already, you're kind of behind the game when you're telling the kids, okay, this is how you're going to do things now. Now it's already in the counting. So can we do it at 8th grade where it's not as consequential, but expect the same level of, for the kids,
Yeah, well, so our 8th graders are already in teaming structures, and most of our middle schools now have intervention structures built into a schedule beyond the core classes, during which they can provide some of this, not only notice about what's going to happen in the 9th grade, but also intervene with some of the learning difficulties that students may be having at that time. We started a 9th grade academy in Wake County in 1993, and we very much wanted to create in that high school a teaming structure that was a mirror of what was going on in the 8th grade, so there would not be such a dramatic rupture of the students' expectations as they moved into that 9th grade. And we were strategic about the fact that they would be integrated with the entire student body so that they wouldn't feel isolated. We once had a practice in our high schools that every child should be known well by at least one adult. And we were in a major movement of smaller learning communities within our high schools. I'll give you an example. Right now, our CTE academies and some other structures are in place in high schools in which kids can belong and get a sense of participation, which also will help out with their academics. So I'm saying that wherever we can get high school kids in some kind of teaming structures, whether it's academic or otherwise, the more we are helping them with that transition to high school. In fact, I'll say to you, if we get every kid to participate in athletics or some other student activity program, we could intervene with most of these problems. And in fact, our district often has created many ways to provide transportation for students after the regular school day so that they can get involved in some of our after-school programming. Again, it's all about creating a sense of belonging for that child in high school, because in their teaming structures in middle schools, they had that sense of belonging. And then again, with many structures going on now, they can get some of the intervention they need. Middle schools, you may hear of things like Cougar Time, or they try to specialize it to the brand and the logo and the mascot of the school. There's much being done. Is it enough? It never is. As I said, it's like when that kid goes to high school, open the gate from the inside to go through. Whereas for 8 years, they've been going into that high school and somebody's been opening that gate from the outside and saying, pass. So that's a key shift for our students.
You had, going back to what you were talking about with the subgroups and the early warning, what kind of data, if you could share with us, like how did they collect the data and when do they start to see, like I'm wondering, is there a point when we start to, or how they review it to get to the point where they know that this might be a potential issue? What point does it start?
A lot of early warning tracking systems start really at third grade and start looking at, did the child pass EOGs at the third grade level, attendance issues, behavior issues, and continuing. And so as you gather more data, you see more flags if there's an issue. And so the early warning tracking begins early as students begin to get in that intermediate level. Brad, you may want to add on.
Yeah,
research on early
all
warning
the, the three main data points, usually you hear the acronym ABCs, right? Attendance, behavior, course grades. Those are the three kind of components of most of those early warning systems. And all of our schools have daily access to that data, all of their students, day-by-day attendance, quarterly course grades. Individual teachers, of course, have their own grade books, and those kinds of things. I think the problem is, like, when does a problem become a problem? Right? How many data points do you have to have? Is third grade too early, or would you wait and see about fourth grade? I think that's the part where we have to get a little bit more precise and maybe a little bit more strategic about how long do you let it go before, well, I mean, our kids, my son's gone through school, he had some really good years, he had some years that were really not good. Like, is one predictive of the next? It's like, at what point do you have to kind of say, okay, that's too much, we really need to do something fundamentally different for that child? I think that we've probably not been super tight about, other than making sure that the information is available to schools, rather than being a little more prescriptive about when and how to intervene specifically along that continuum, starting as back as far as third grade.
And I'd like to throw in too, we have some innovation in our high schools now that we are back from the thing, is that what you call it? The pandemic. We're back into conventional structures. We also have been through a period of crisis, which often prompts a great deal of innovation. At Garner High, for example, some of my friends there create a progress monitoring tool for the high school.
That was part of my comments.
Oh, you were going to make it?
You can do it. You
Okay.
can steal my thunder.
All right. So this is very good now. The primary, not primary, but one of the key points of a problem for a child in high school is not completing assignments. Now, so that sounds simple to everyone at the desk here, because you completed all yours in high school, right? You did all the homework.
I did, but I had a high school.
So
I think that's a huge struggle, actually.
it is. So
It was his sarcasm.
now
No, I meant
at this innovative practice at school, there's a progress monitoring tool where a teacher can pop up and they're populating data in here, and an individual child can come up and the teacher can immediately see the number of days absent, can see the number of grades, but most importantly, can see the number of assignments that are missing at that particular time. Because then all of the other intervention specialists in the building will gather around that data to begin to do something really simple, like do your homework, complete this assignment, turn it in. Not necessarily on time, because we've given up the time variable, I regret to say, over a period of time. But they've got to get it in, and they've got to get it in before the end of the grading period. Because as you've heard, most of our credit is earned in a graduated way to be promoted. And if you don't do your homework, if you don't turn in the assignment, you don't get credit. So this is innovative now, and even at Garner High, they have created within the week a period of time when kids leave their other classes and they go to one session where they work on nothing but making up your work. Because I will say to you, that's a key indicator at the high school level for gaining credit. Most teachers want children to be promoted. They want the children to get good grades. But the children have to do the work. And did they do that in middle and elementary? Yes. But it is different in high school because that's the way the credit is earned.
Well, I think in elementary school, they got all those fun little stickers and fuzzy balls, so it was fun, right? Now it's more challenging as the kids get older, and they did face, the pandemic and all those challenges. So I understand and I appreciate, actually, that Garner is doing that to kind of help. And I think we did have that in my kids' high school, too. They have, Husky Help, and
Yes.
that's a point where you go in and you kind of help catch up, and if there's a certain day for each one of your classes that they focus on. I was wondering, with my question, at what point do we team up with family and intervention to say, we see that the attendance has been a problem, grades have kind of been up and down, and they do go through periods, and maturity has a lot to do with that. At what point do we need an intervention so that when they do get from 8th to 9th grade, it's not all of a sudden just way too much for this child to handle in 9th grade? Because it is a big transition.
Yes.
I think back to Brad's point, we have all those things in with the MTSS, and they're doing kid talks and checking data, but it's being a little more prescriptive, maybe a little more monitoring to make sure that as we look at the particular subgroup, when we look at those numbers, how are we really tackling kind of that issue? So I think we have globally the systems and structures in place, but maybe a little more monitoring and being a little more prescriptive about what are next steps. Schools have interventionists, they have scheduling where they provide the additional support. So the groundwork has been laid for all of this to occur. And so beginning as early really as kindergarten, but just thinking about how we monitor that and support our principals and teachers in monitoring what's actually happening as we get the data.
And then if I could follow with one more question. You mentioned the program for credit recovery in summer school. Just as a question, what do we expect from credit recovery? Is it more lesson for retention, or is it, how involved do the teachers get in teaching with summer school, or because you mentioned online, or is it really just to make up the work that was missed?
Great question. So with our new product, which you allowed us to purchase, thank you. Yeah, it's more expensive than an older product we were using. Some of you may have heard the term grad point. And now we have a new tool for that purpose. Its applications are much more robust than what we had with the old plan. In other words, for every objective, there's a video with a teacher providing the lesson. In other words, this is instruction not just through online application, but through some bit of animation from the teacher. Our children did not like that this summer when we made that switch. In fact, when I visited some of the sites this summer just to monitor that, I kept hearing, how can we skip the video? Because prior to the use of prior to this product, using the old product, they could cheat the software, and they could figure out how to install, fill what you're saying, do busy work, and somehow get credit for that busy work. And now, through our new product, again, that you provided, thank you very much, they now have to do a little bit more rigorous work with an application. And I do want to add, credit recovery at high school is not necessarily an online application. So in terms of credit recovery, wherever we may provide that, it's by any means. And so some of our schools may see that there's a need to bring in a teacher. In the cases I worked with, it was always math, right? So I would always want to bring in another math teacher to our credit recovery program in order to provide more direct instruction and intervention with the children who couldn't get that with any kind of online application. Now, we were able last summer to recover over 7,600 credits. Now that's district-wide. But, Ms. Swanson, to your question earlier, so that fourth quarter often produces what we used to call senioritis. We don't use that term much anymore. But if that happens, we do have a window of time before the end of the month of June or July in order to deal with some of these other ways to make children, not make, but to allow them the opportunity, again, to open that gate from the inside. I have known some principals to even create special situations for kids to come in and get more rigorous coursework than might be provided through an online application. I'm trying to say it's not just busy work. And with our new product, the children were complaining quite a bit. It was one of those complaints I enjoyed hearing. I mean, I would go in, somebody would say, that's the guy from the district office. Kid would say, come here, come here. How do I get rid of this video? And now, you'll appreciate that our teachers are much more happy with our new product because they already have discovered that it has reduced opportunities for cheating. Or you may want to use another word, that's a kind of emotionally charged word, for tricking the system in order to just to get the credit earned.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and, I can share our proudness of Garner with you.
Thank you, Ms.
I will say, to Ms. Caulfield's point, quite a few schools have this, but it is the full progress monitoring that was different for me, that I hadn't seen at another high school, that also allows the kids some responsibility because they are meeting with the teacher. They're not just going to get help, they actually are watching their progress alongside. The other thing that I think that's coupled, and then I'll get to my question, that I believe is coupled with it is which you all have heard me rave about this, is the work that they did that made them have the Counselor of the Year social worker. It's their ramp, the work that they did to become diamond level schools with the ramp project really actually facilitated, or I would say go alongside with the progress monitoring, in that they use that progress monitoring to say you are in this group. And here are the things that we believe you need. So they also created some peer support sharing so that students, again, you hear me, I say this all the time, schools have to figure out who your influencers are. And they can be engaged in, and Matt Price says it best, the principal there, he's like, I find the toughest kid and be like, so is this how you want to behave? Of course, they don't want to behave that way with the principal. And he talks to them directly, and that person, you easily get to change the dynamics in a group because they also had bad grades, but now they're the person who is in this group that are actually moving all the kids along because they're using their influence for good. And of course, I would be remiss to not directly say, all of that includes parent engagement to the level that they can get the parents to engage. We know that parents start to check out in high school with parent-teacher conferences, like the list goes on, you start to see them show up later. So I wanted to add kind of what I see as the complexity of what they've done to really, I believe, elevate Matt and I are also competitive. So it's all about, we want all of our kids
Go
to win.
Trojans,
That's
go
right.
Trojans.
We're also like, all these kids got to win. We got to get these numbers together. But I think it's the first time I've seen a school actually address a holistic approach. And they are very clear when you go in there and talk to them that they are targeting their Black and Hispanic kids, and they don't make excuses about why, because the numbers reflect that that's the audience that they should be paying attention to. But then my question is, how do we use this full, I would say, kind of process that they've come up with to actually share at all schools? Like, I just went to another high school that's not mine last week, so they could show me some of the things they're doing, and it's pieces of it, but I feel like there's so many of our schools who have great nuggets to do what we know needs to be done, but I'm not sure, and I've said this to you, I'm not sure how you create this so that it's district-wide. Like, how do we determine these are the things that are working for this subgroup of students, and so how do we holistically say, and of course it can't be prescriptive, schools are different, but I feel like we're missing the opportunity to not say, here is where we see real progress and change, and here you go, and you make it work for your school in the ways that make sense. That for me is the disconnect when I visit schools, is I don't hear some of the things that I can see by the school's data that these elements that they've created have created change. So that's my first question. I don't know how we do that, and I'm not sure, and I'm not saying it be prescriptive, but I'm curious if we have a way of peer sharing outside of their district, their regions, to ensure that these things are being shared, especially where the bulk of our Black and brown students are, so they can utilize these. So that's my first question. And my second is, one of the things that Garner was just over me with, and it's all the schools there, because all of those schools are feeders, because the magnets sit in the municipality, and they've started to do this, but one of the biggest gripes I had was there was no connection K-12, preferably pre-K, because pretrial pre-K, but there was no connection, so they left your school, and then there was no follow-up to middle school. Hey, these are the kids we need to be paying attention to, because we know in third grade. So I will say, 2 ramps ago, the high school did that with their 2 middle schools, and they did take all the data from the middle school, and those school counselors really did a deep dive and started the school year with a focus on those students.
So I want to say, I want to praise my boss mainly because that's what we're supposed to do, right? So under Dr. Wilson Norman's leadership and Dr. Taylor's leadership, which he's done so quickly, we have organized our department now into support team units. In fact, just as recently as last night, you approved another person who can join our elementary structures. But we have recognized for a long time that the connection between middle and high, particularly 6 through 12, needs to be strengthened. So our department now is organized now into support teams, secondary teams, and we're taking more of a regional approach so that as we get into the structure beginning next semester, we will be able to have a middle and high school person dealing with our principals in order to get to some of the connections that you're mentioning. And that's critical. I think structurally we are addressing that problem in a critical way. And back to your other question, innovation is a very lazy athlete. And by the way, Garner High is the first school that had a 9th grade academy.
Yes,
Go
the building's still there.
Go Trojans.
If you didn't know, this is a Trojan and a Garner native. Through and through.
Just wanted- We had that kind of conversation earlier about your old school, but it's a great school. We know that if what innovation we see going on at one school is good, our job in academics through the support team structure is to accelerate that and expose that so that others can catch on. When we started 9th grade academy, it was only within 3 years that schools started visiting Garner High or wherever the structure started in order to bring that innovation back to the high school.
So my work here is done, thank you. Wilson Norman.
To your
No, seriously,
point-
I do think that made a difference.
To your point, I think that's more what my question was before, was like, because we've mentioned silos before, and breaking that down where 6 to 12 actually works together and it follows the student. I think that will answer a lot of questions and prevent a lot of
We're
struggles
excited.
that we see.
We're very excited that now when we meet with principals, for example, we're doing that by secondary.
Well, I appreciate all that has been said. I'm going to make a point of advocacy around this work, and I hear Ms. Johnson-Hostler talking about what is happening in Garner and how do we do that in other parts of the county. And the relationship, I'm looking at Dr. Wilson Norman, I'm looking at Chief Ellis, and thinking about what that could look like. You know, the board had expressed interest in having another coach. How many coaches are we at now?
We're at 4.
Okay, so we had expressed support for an additional coach. Is there value in having an additional coach whose primary focus is on this ninth grade need, and to be able to take and share the model? Because I'm hearing solutions in the room, but not really making their way around to the district. Is there value in, Chief Ellis, an additional coach, which we're still advocating for that fifth coach at a minimum, to be able to mimic that? What would that look like? Are you interested, Dr. Chief Ellis, in
Very interesting.
Okay, you wanna join?
I would have to work with Dr. Wilson Norman and her team and what that might look like, because when you focus just on the ninth grade, you are pulling a coach away from some other areas that.
We're thinking of adding this, just a dedicated coach in addition, not taking
But
from.
when you add that additional one and pull, you will be possibly other schools that need to be assigned to a coach, you will not have that ability unless we really find a cohort of 7 to 9 schools that would fit that ninth grade academy. It's necessary. There are two experiences. I was talking to Dr. Taylor on the side here. We remember when East Cary had the ninth grade center. And we remember when Panther Creek had the ninth grade center, and they did not intermingle, et cetera. The value is significant. So what I'm thinking is that a coach would probably be really strong if we identify the high schools where the data support exactly that level of coaching, and then you have to recruit for a coach that has that level of experience and clearly has demonstrated effectiveness and impact in moving, achievement, and coaching in that area. But definitely, that's a yes.
So how do we close the loop on that happening and not just being a conversation in this room, but closing the loop on going through the process of seeing if that's something that can be added, if the funds are available, if the process can be completed? How do we close the loop so that it just doesn't end as a possibility, a conversation, and not necessarily come to be materialized? We've been using the word tangible in a lot of contexts in the last few days, and I'm a person that likes to close the loop on things, so what does that look like?
Well, we're working on it now. Dr. Taylor has been instrumental. I think within the last 2 weeks, he has given his full endorsement and support of my connecting with Dr. Wilson Norman and Mr. Nieder, Chief Nieder, on the funding sources. And he's been really clear that between those two, he wants to see the funds dedicated to that fifth coach.
Okay.
So we are working on it, and I know I've already had the conversations with Dr. Wilson Norman, but now what you all are saying now is giving it focus, really intentionality around something really specific that we can work on.
And we all look to your expertise because you have a level of expertise and that we don't possess. But I shouldn't say I with my 1/9, all of the weight of my 1/9, and I see heads nodding, support, triaging the ninth grade, especially as we have had here at Student Achievement. We've heard from Principal Harden came and presented to us about how they are addressing what the need is for Hispanic males at Southeast Raleigh High School. Throw that since we talked about the Trojans. That
Go Bulldogs.
Go Bulldogs.
I said we're all our black and brown students, so I got a list of schools.
Yes. but in full advocacy, making sure that we do have intentionality around making movement. Because I hear a lot of solutions in the room There seems to be a lot of different things going on. If there's a way to kind of be intentional around the sharing of best practices and benchmarking and seeing those implementations, I think that would be really meaningful as we, focus on student achievement. And Ms. Johnson-Hostel, it looks like you have your hand.
I did, and it was my last point, but perfectly you went to advocacy, and that is, yes, I wasn't actually going to the coach, I actually was going to student support services, which I just talked with Ms. about, that is a missing link for me too. And that's why I brought up the Garner model, because I think it's missing from all of our schools who have primarily Black and brown students. I also believe that there should be a student support service, at least 1 to 2 people who are dedicated to those schools, like a coach, because that is the missing link. When Ms. Caulfield talked about parental engagement, when we can't get that, our job is to stand in the gap of that. And so that is my other advocacy that I'm hoping I can walk away there and be like, yes, we are there. But that's the other piece of advocacy that I do think is missing, is the accessibility of student support services, particularly for these subgroups that we're talking about.
Absolutely, and I see Mr. Swanson and Mr. Hershey.
Yeah, and I don't know if Ms.
Oh, and
No,
Ms. Edmonds, did I
can't say
overlook
any
you?
better.
Okay, well,
Yes.
lots of advocacy going on, and to make sure that you all feel supported and resourced in the way you need to be able to see changes in the data. Mr. Swanson?
Yes, and I support everything that's been said thus far. I just want to add, and I would be remiss, I was hoping Dr. Ng was going to raise this point, but as a former special education teacher, I can't not express the need of making sure that we're centering those students, especially on the front end, because oftentimes Black and brown students are identified as special education in those early years. And if we're saying that third grade and early third grade is pivotal, we have to put some steps in so our students, especially our Black and brown students, are not over identified. And so that is another piece that I hope that we can look at and bring in our student exceptional children special education department into the table to talk about how we can ensure that those students have the success and the tools they need to be successful, so we can also stop over-identifying our students. Because I saw at third grade that when you start looking into those IEPs, it's behavior, it's attendance, it's little things, but you're not getting to the root cause of why little Tyler is acting out in third grade, because there's so many other issues that is not being presented. And then last, I would just say, when we invest in our Black and brown children and be unapologetic about that, all kids succeed, because we are empowering our Black and brown students to be the leaders in the classroom, to teach and to help their colleagues. And so it's a both-and approach, and I think that once we start doing that and be bold in that leadership, then we can be that number one flagship in the nation as we are showing folks how to do this work and how to do this work well. Because there's a difference between doing the work, but I believe in doing something well so others can see. And so hopefully those schools that are doing this work, that we can do some peer-to-peer training so that information can get out and we can release these principals to do what's best in their schools.
Thank you for listening up. And Mr. Hershey?
So I'm very, very interested, you started to go down this path, and Brad did, of developing a profile. And like, when could we see the results of whatever data points you all decide? I'm not going to weigh in on anything like that, but coming to us and saying, here's our profile when we are starting to identify students, whether it's first grade, second grade, third grade, whatever you all want to use, that we can then apply countywide to see if it's impactful and how we can better use resources. But also, do we have a way now, and I would want this to be a part of it, technology-wise, that when a kid goes from 5th grade to 6th grade, that there's an automatic notification, here's a child that we've identified that is a little behind in whatever areas or is struggling with attendance, whatever the profile says. Do we have that now, and how do we build that if we don't?
I would say that we have several systems that we track and identify. And I'll let Brad speak because I don't know all the different data systems, but do we have one system that we all go to? So we're using ECATS, we have our progress monitoring tools where we're tracking performance of students all along. We have
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple places, and that's part of the problem. The conversation before about being a little more strategic and prescriptive about where you go to look,
Right,
what
that's
you go
what
to
I'm
look
interested
for,
in.
and what constitutes a green light, a yellow light, or a red light.
Yes.
Is not something that we've had really a lot of unanimity around. There's been different people doing that in different ways, and I think the challenge for us is to be able to integrate all that work and put it in one place, so that way what's happening at North Garner Middle School and how they're looking at that question is not any different than how they're looking at it at Wellspring Millbrook Middle School. Because right now, I think we have a lot of approaches, all of which are well-intentioned.
Yeah.
But they're not coordinated, they're not strategic, and that prevents Stacy and her folks from really aligning behind that in terms of interventions and resources and things, because we don't have a way. We have been talking internally about doing that. Now that we are essentially like a good year or two clear of the pandemic, the nice thing is that now a lot of the data that we would rely on to do that is now much more consistent and accurate. Like if we had tried to triage kids based on attendance, well, during the pandemic, attendance data was sketchy at best. And now that that data is much more crystallized, much more normalized, and we've got like a year or 18 months worth of decent history, I think we're at the point where we can really start doing something around that in a way that not only gives us a good long time trend on a kid, but also is post-pandemic data that's reflective of the current reality, as opposed to maybe how kids might have shaped up back in 2017, 2018, which is probably not as good of a reflection of what the need is today.
Is that something that could be done on time for the next school year?
That's what our conversations have been about, yes, hopefully by like July, to be able to have something that everyone has access to consistently, hopefully by the next school year, yes.
Because I think the challenge is, so Garner has prioritized
Right.
that. But someone else has to, either you have to have someone who has the data background, the time to do it. And so when you think about district-wide, having the same tools available so that the area superintendent can coach the principals to do it. As we're building our regional support teams, we can coach the principals to do it. We can coach IFs and teachers. But when everyone is approaching the data system a little bit differently, you spend a lot of time ciphering through the data. And so I think that is probably, as Brad and I would say, something that they're really working towards as a help to both of these departments, chief of schools and academics, that we need the data quickly so we can help schools interpret it, use it, and they need the data quickly. So that's something that.
Is there anything that we can advocate for to see that system, whether it's technology pieces or?
Yeah, they're good. We've been speaking to our friends in technology services about that, and they've got some thoughts about how that might work, that we've started having some really good conversations with them around it. We also have a new student information system that the whole state is transitioning to in about 18 months called Infinite Campus. So we won't have Power School, we'll have this whole other new system, and that potentially has some really neat, could potentially have some tools that are not available to us now that could also help sort of speed that effort up a little bit too. So could be some opportunities, could also be some challenges. We're really not quite sure exactly how that's going to shake out, but that's clearly going to affect our data landscape in terms of what we have available and how we make stuff available to schools as well.
When is
So it's a
that?
little bit of a variable.
When did you say we'll get that?
Sashi's not here, July 2025.
And I think it's in
Is
a
the go live
rollout.
date? Yeah. So yeah, it's supposed to go live for the 25-26 school year.
I would certainly advocate for whomever is chair of this committee next to have this brought back in a few months to kind of get a progress update on that.
Yes, this has been a really robust discussion, and we've got some more information, but I would like to lift up a couple of additional points of advocacy. The parent education piece, I've heard from some of our schools that a lot of parents don't understand what the requirements are for their child to be able to move from grade to grade, and just making sure that we are intentional about supporting particularly our most vulnerable students to make sure that their parents are well informed about what they need, so that at the end of the year, no one is surprised when a child is retained. And so that parent education piece is definitely important. And then, ongoing discussions around, and this is probably a legislative, agenda item, but just making sure that we look at and the possibility of social workers at our most high needs high schools. I think that is dedicated social workers at our most high needs high schools. And I saw Ms. Caulfield, and then if you have a question, then we'll go into our third grade Read to Achieve.
Thank you. if this collection of data that you're speaking about today, is this something that's relatively new? Because you did mention that the pandemic kind of put like a damper on getting, continuous data to be able to use it. Having the data obviously is extremely helpful, so it helps us proceed and to know where to go. So is that relatively new?
No, most of the data points that we're talking about that would populate a system like this, or that would be set as the criteria for this, are things that we've collected all along. The problem during the pandemic is that the reliability of some of that information got questionable as we were trying to navigate what does it mean for a student to be in attendance when they're in remote learning, and there was a lot of concern about the accuracy of some of that. So it's not necessarily new data, it's just that now we got a little bit more faith in the data that we're getting than we did when kids were in and out of remote and in-person learning for a good stretch of time, like about 18 months. But no, none of it's new.
So when we get this data and it is more consistent, what do we have in place to follow up with it? Because we can have the best plan put out there, and implementing it, even, suggestions of how to do it, but like you mentioned, we do have 200 schools with all different principals and different grade levels that have different needs. So how do we plan on following up to make sure that we're tweaking it the right way?
That's the $64,000 question, right? That's the treadmill on the second floor of my house that's absolutely wonderful, but if I don't get on it, it's not going to be any good. And that's some of the structures that we have to build to get some of the tights around this, so that we don't have to rely on a Garner High School to kind of figure it out on their own and do it their way.
And
That's actually going to be the harder part, frankly.
Right.
I think.
And I'll just throw in too, we're beginning a process through the academics of what we call instructional walks, learning rounds, where we'll be more involved in the schools in order to see what these data points are and whether they are consistent across the district. That's another second semester innovation.
Thank you. It looks like it's time for our third grade read to achieve.
Yes, so in the policy on reporting on retentions, there is a specific requirement around third grade that comes from the state Read to Achieve program. And so the actual physical report that satisfies that requirement is linked on our website here, so it is available to the public. There's also a similar one for grades 1 and 2 to fulfill the requirement. But I'll just go over the most recent third grade data here, and this is from the end of the past school year. So at the end of grade 3, third grade students have multiple opportunities or gateways to be able to be successfully promoted to the next grade or to meet the Read to Achieve standard. And this is just a breakdown of how many kids met that standard and through what manner. And you can see the bulk of them meet that standard every year by getting a proficient score either on the beginning of third grade EOG or the end of third grade EOG. A slightly less known fact, if you get a proficient score on the BOG at the beginning of the year, that technically counts as meeting the third grade promotion standard, because that is technically an end of third grade level test in terms of rigor. So 58% of our third graders met that last year using those state tests. We had about another almost 10% who were proficient on alternate tests, so that could have been something like like M-class probably for most of those kids. Meeting a certain standard on M-class also checks the box for Read to Achieve third grade promotion. And then we have smaller percentages of students who are actually exempt from the requirement, either due to their status as multilingual learners or English learners, or because they have an IEP and are receiving special education services, particularly as it pertains to reading. And then when you take out all those, you're left with about 24.6% of students who did not meet the Read to Achieve standard at the end of the year. And those would be the students who would be prioritized for the summer camps to get priority access to those. And now we only had about, I think, 996 students out of the nearly 3,000 who were priority eligible for camps actually attend those camps. And a couple of hundred of them did meet that standard by the end of the camp, so that purple pie slice did get a little bit smaller after the end of reading camps based on the kids who did attend it. And there's more detail about where these numbers come from, as I said, at that link down at the bottom of the website. And that concludes our report on retentions as per policy.
All right, so each year the district shares guidance with principals around promotion and retention, and that guidance includes data sources to consider. It also includes a timeline, which in the timeline there's explicit direction on frequent parent notification, and this usually happens before the end of the first semester. in high school.
And we've talked about the issue of how students move from one grade level to the next. On this screen, you can see, back to communication, what we began communicating, well, next week when we start our registration process, and also what we post in our program planning guide, which is online for anyone to check, and this is also at every school webpage. But cut to the chase, you see that promotion at the high school level is based on, you've got to do English, but from grade 9 forward, 2 credits in these areas listed. You can read that information. I'm not going to read it to you. We do have our academies and alternative schools which permit a 22 credit for graduation, and their promotion is a different structure.
And finally, this slide outlines additional opportunities and instructional supports that we provide for schools and students. So at each school, there's an intervention team that monitors the progress of students who have an intervention plan, which means they need, in addition to core instruction, maybe some strategic or intensive instruction. And under literacy interventions, you see a list of items. All of these items are at the elementary level, and they are mandated through legislation. And Mr. Williams already spoke about credit and objective recovery. I didn't know if you want to say anything about repeating a course.
Nothing other than it is permissible that if a child wishes to redo a course in order to enhance skill or knowledge, that is permissible, and sometimes that plays a role in this.
And then for our students with disabilities or our students with limited English proficiency, they also receive additional instruction. And finally, tutoring and expanded learning opportunities are available to students, and following this presentation, you will hear more about high-dosage tutoring. Can we answer any questions that you may have?
Yeah, so I understand that, you know, the IEP and the English learner population are exempt from the Read to Achieve report. What kind of measurement tools are in place to track their proficiencies, or, you know, for those individual? I mean, I would understand the IEP one, it's very individualized, right? But in terms of the English learners, what kind of things are in place to keep kind of monitoring their progress?
We look at our WIDA assessments, and that kind of tracks a child's acquisition of language and writing skills, and so we look at that over time and look at which domain and levels in which they fall in to begin to determine if we're making progress or not.
And are there like thresholds for in terms of like to act upon if a person is not meeting their expectations?
There are thresholds, and it determines whether or not they receive ESL services or additional services and supports based upon those levels.
And each of our individual schools get reports on the amount of progress kids make, not just which kids exit services, but which kids are making the appropriate amount of progress along that continuum, building those on an annual basis.
Thank you.
Ms. Caulfield?
How many, going back to slide 9, it says that 24.6 were not proficient. How many students does that come out to?
About 3,000, 2,900, I think the number's on the slide.
2904.
2,904.
Oh, I'm sorry, is there any?
Yeah, if you go to the next slide, it kind of pops up.
Right, so that was actually going to be part of my next question, is if we have 94 that are still not proficient after the summer camp, are we considering something different than what we have in there now? That seems pretty much almost not effective, right?
Yeah, so out of that 2,900, only about 900 actually attended camp. And out of those, after 12 days of additional instruction, 17% were able to become proficient, which was about 174 students. So we are, thinking about ways to beef that up. But reading camp is only 12 days of additional instruction. So we'll try to look more at they're at least making progress towards that grade level proficiency, because it may be quite difficult to move them from non-proficient to proficient after only 12 days.
Depends on how close the kids are to the cut. Right? The kids who are almost there will generally do it, but kids who are still like 2 years behind, like those additional days are just not enough of a dosage.
And then certain kids get additional support in 4th grade.
Yes.
As part of that continuum.
Any other questions? Well, we certainly do value the work that you are doing. It is making a difference across the district, and thank you for reporting out to us. Much appreciated.
And go Wildcats.
Yes, I am a Millbrook High School graduate. We are transitioning to high dosage tutoring.
So our two presentations kind of support each other. The high dosage tutoring, we'll hear a lot about ways in which we really support early literacy and early learning with our high dosage tutoring. And we're happy to highlight some of the strong points of things that are underway. And then as we're building out and continuing our work with high dosage tutoring, really thinking about how we're building a tutoring hub, because there's some age groups and levels and subjects that we don't address yet that we want to build out and be able to address. So we want to provide you with a highlight of what's going on, and then come back as we continue to update what we are providing for students. So Michelle Woodson and Becky Foote will join me to provide the presentation. And then we have two members from our school community from Smith Elementary, Beverly Smith from Smith.
I love saying
Well, welcome. Thank you.
Well, we did have it over here, but I'm not sure how.
It is always meaningful to have members of our school communities come to student achievement, so we can really uplift the work that you're doing inside of our buildings. And good to see Ms. Foote, and still going through the science of reading information that you shared with me as the mother of a pre-K student. So thank you. Let's
see, for some reason we're not transitioning. There you go. Thank you. So we hope today to be able to share with you our desired outcomes, or to share the impact of high dosage tutoring and the models that we're using, outline the features of each program, provide some initial data, and share future planning.
Okay. It's not, I'm not sure why it's not advancing.
Well, you know, technology will do what it will do, so we will take a brief pause.
So I will go ahead. The next slide after this is really going to speak specifically to the connection to our strategic plan again. Much of what Sarita already mentioned. We want to make sure that we're focused on that high-quality core instruction. We want to talk about how this relates to the student skills and knowledge. Thank you so much. And obviously, the proficiency of our students and the success of our students is all about how we achieve that graduation rate. Again, reaching those proficiency levels that we mentioned earlier, and really thinking about growth for our students over time. And that's really what we're looking to do as we're moving forward. So we want to talk a little bit today about high dosage tutoring, and it is important that we think about that structure, because it is so important that students build relationships with trusted adults, but they also have an opportunity to expand their instructional opportunities in other ways. And we know that what research tells us about high dosage tutoring is that that consistent adult is significant for their social emotional, again, just helping to build those strong relationships. But it also really provides an opportunity, if we train those adults in what specifically we want them to do, so that it's targeted to the need of those instructional needs of those students, that we can really enhance the ultimate outcome. Many times we've had tutoring in the past where tutoring, and I used to participate in it, both as a teacher but also as a volunteer, where you can go and read with a student, which is a wonderful thing to do. We still want that to occur. But sometimes if it's not as strategic, we can't see the movement along the way, and we can't progress monitor the efforts that are happening there. So our programs are really trying to focus on how we specifically design those components so that we can support that process for our students. And we want to make sure that we're really, again, meeting the specific needs that these students have, so that we can target the instruction to where they are and then monitor their progress along the way, which I think lots of you have talked about, is how do we monitor that progress as they're moving through the process. So these are some of the approaches that we have to our tutoring models. You know, obviously during school, after school, we have volunteers that are participating, partnerships with community organizations, and really even virtual support. These many models are what we're hoping, and as Dr. Wilson Norman also mentioned, to allow us to really meet the kids where they are, right? We want to meet them where they are based on the needs that they have, and it will hopefully provide that support for them. So I'm going to begin today talking about multiple models that we're going to highlight today, and the first one we're going to talk about is the North Carolina Ed Corps that we are currently engaged with. So the North Carolina Ed Corps is really focused in our elementary schools, and we currently have 22 schools, in this school year, in the 23-24 school year, that are focused in this effort. And the North Carolina Ed Corps was a tutoring program that was designed for K-2 students during the day. And this was a statewide entity that kind of came about during the pandemic to try to provide support to accelerate learning to those students who needed some additional support. Some of the benefits of this is that the North Carolina Ed Corps recruits and trains tutors for districts, Wake also, but many districts across the state at no cost to the district. The district does hire those tutors. That's where this is a little bit of a different model. And we compensate those individuals as they provide some support for our students. We do use a small group literacy model. These particular tutors are getting training in the science of reading, as you all just talked a little bit about that, right? And they are also getting a real focus on Letterland, which is our phonics program that we currently use in classrooms and provide support for those tutors to be able to be engaged in that classroom with that teacher in a small group environment to provide support for those students. And in this current school year, we currently have 39 tutors hired in 21 schools. We are currently working to place 5 more, so we're constantly looking for more. We have a full capacity for this school year is 44 tutors at 22 schools. So we're working to gain that full capacity. You're going to hear us talk a little bit about volunteer management in just a little bit as we're continually trying to recruit people to come and help support. But that's kind of where we are this year. This is our 3rd year in this work, and we have had really good success. We've had a lot of really positive outcomes. We are monitoring progress with that program as well. That really started with the NC Ed Corps. They across the state using an app called Litera, where they're trying to track the frequency in which students are being seen, how long are they being seen, what's the attendance like, and then of course also looking at student data to make sure that we're making progress. So the next tutoring opportunity I'd love to share with you is a little bit about what we're doing with regards to math enrichment. So we're going to talk a little bit about a supplemental instructional model for mathematics at the middle school level. The federal government and state government provided some dollars to support this based on, again, pandemic relief in the last few years. And on the next, yep, you got it, thank you so much. This is a tutoring opportunity in mathematics, again, supplemental instruction to what their core is, which is what they have in their regular classroom. And it's a before and after school, and that's a requirement from the dollars that we're able to use, is that it happens before and after school. And what we're doing is trying to build that conceptual knowledge for students. And I'm going to use an example because I used to be a middle school teacher. A lot of times we have students who need support with algebraic thinking when they're coming into middle school, but we also have students that need some support in rational numbers, just fractions, right? Just understanding conceptually what they mean, because if you don't have a good solid foundation of that information, when you get into higher level math courses, it just is a real challenge as you're moving forward. So we have curated some materials that are able to be used by our staff before and after school. You can be a math teacher at a middle school doing this, but you could be the PE or the art teacher doing this, which one of the things that, with the curriculum that we're talking about, is we want curricula that is accessible by many people. You don't have to be a middle school or high school math teacher to be able to know this content, but we can still build capacity for those individuals. We are currently in 33 of our middle schools this current year that are currently participating, and I'm trying to make sure I got through all of that. We are really working to make sure we're providing consistency, as some of you mentioned, also around the implementation and the guidance to the schools. So we've given them some guidance to look at some of those thresholds you've talked about when we have a universal screener test, which we do anyway. Where are those thresholds where we think there might be risk, and then how do we define who those students are, recommend them for the specific tutoring opportunities. The students are, of course, afforded that opportunity. We provide the intervention during that time, and then we also continually assess, right? We're looking to say, do we see today that you've made progress in what we thought we were focused with you yesterday, and do you see that happen over time? And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward as well. This does happen in small groups, and the students are developing some skills, I think, that will help serve them as they're moving through the math program as they're moving forward. An additional component to this is very exciting, I think, and that is that we are also partnering and in discussions right now for the spring semester with potentially four, maybe more, of our community partners to do this along with us. So the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, the Daniel Center, and Communities in Schools is also we're also thinking and partnering with them that we might train their staff, whether they be volunteers and or employees of their organizations, provide them some of the very same resources, and then in their after-school programs or before school, if that's a part of their model, that they can also model this structure. And we will be able to, again, we're tagging those students so we know in currently Power School, right, who those kids are. We will continue to assess those students over time to see if they're making progress towards their goals, which will only inform instruction for the teachers and what they do next in the coursework as well. So we want to talk a little bit more about our community collaboration, and we're going to talk today a little bit about Wake Together. I've talked to you multiple times in the last year about this program. This is an initiative with a coalition of our community partners across the Wake County community, thinking about how we deliver high-dosage tutoring for students, and we're specifically talking in the past year about literacy. We do know that we will likely want to expand this as we go forward. We have been tracking data on this particular project as well, and we'll show you some of that this afternoon. But we know that we will want to expand as we want to serve more students and gain more community input as well. So beginning in the fall of 2022, the Wake County Public Schools and the community partners began to work together to design and deploy this tutoring program that addresses the needs of our students, align our work so that we're able to impact those outcomes. This initiative provided community members also who chose to have volunteers and opportunities to be trained with evidence-based curriculum, so they have something that they can work with. And the volunteers are paired with the schools who work with the students about 1 to 2 hours per week. We are currently using what we call the HELPS curriculum, and it is a fluency-based curriculum. If you're familiar with the elements of what we need to do to make sure that students are able to read effectively, fluency is a huge indicator of their ability to comprehend. So again, we're looking at student data at the elementary school through that universal screening data, which is M-Class for us, and we look at where we see risk. We can identify who are the students that might be potential candidates based on that data, and then we can also progress monitor their progress over time. The volunteers are given a training in the HELPS curriculum. They are provided an opportunity to really engage in what that looks like. And the good part is, again, you don't have to be a literacy expert. You can work with this program based on how to help a student read fluently. We give them, again, the training and coaching support for that, so that a coach will go out and help the volunteer participate. This is also happening in a small group environment. We're going to explain a little bit more about that in just a moment. And we want to make sure that we're, again, tracking progress with students over time. So I'm going to introduce to you Becky Foote, who is a part of our Title I department, and she has been partnering with me in this past year, and certainly more specifically this fall, in the Wake Together program, and she's going to continue to share some more information.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Michelle. So as you can see on the screen, Wake Together is a true community collaboration. There are several community-based organizations and partners who have worked with us and continue to work with us to find ways to really provide evidence-based learning so that we can close some of the inequities and disparities that we know are in place for our students across our schools. Beginning last year, we began with a HELPS fluency program to provide high dosage tutoring to students using an evidence-based curriculum. HELPS Education Fund and the YWCA of the Triangle last year coordinated this coalition of professionals, community organizations, and volunteers who came together to make this high dosage opportunity possible across our district. This year, Wake Ed Partnership is taking on an expanding leadership role and helping us to recruit volunteers and to place them at participating schools. Tutoring can take place during the school day by volunteers, or, as Michelle also alluded to, after school, delivered by staff and volunteers in community-based organizations. All volunteers are trained in the one-on-one HELPS early learning with practice strategies program. Volunteers work one-on-one with students, which they really, really enjoy, and the students enjoy. And the students participate in the program, the one-on-one program, about 3 times per week for a 20-minute session. In addition, teachers in our schools, and we'll hear from one in a little bit, develop or deliver this instruction to small groups of students during the school day, and that's called HELPS Small Group. And that's part of the tiered supports or the intervention structures that we have in place for supplemental and intensive support for our students based on their data. So HELPS interventions are appropriate for students in elementary grades and older. Our Wake Together partnership has focused on supporting elementary age students in grades 2 through 5. In kindergarten and first grade, students are really focused on those foundational literacy skills, and they're not yet ready for fluency support. So we begin in second grade. The materials are provided for the schools. They're easy to implement, whether you're an educator or a volunteer, someone coming from outside the district, and they're very engaging for students. HELPS provides the materials, like Michelle said, professional learning and coaching support, as well as some extensive data tracking systems that help us progress monitor the students, set goals on a regular basis, reward students when they meet those goals, and then help us continue to advance that growth. Now I have the pleasure to share some data with you from the implementation in our inaugural year of this partnership across the district and our community. So what you're seeing here is, again, around our 22-23 school year implementation. Over 1,000 students received HELPS tutoring during the 2022-23 school year, which was pretty amazing. Of these, 577 students were served in a one-on-one setting with tutoring provided by our trained volunteers. 370 students were served via the small group model, and 111 students had an overlap. They received both, right, in school as well from a trained teacher as well as from a volunteer. The majority of the students who were served using our HELPS curriculum were Black and Hispanic students. You can see that the student numbers from the slide in front of you, we can see students who were served in both structures, who were served just in the one-on-one setting, and those who were served in a small group setting, which you see indicated by the SG in the final column. The following is shown by the data. English language learners made up around 20% of the students who were served. African American or Black students made up over 40% of our students, and Hispanic and Latino students made up over 30% of the students. And we also served about 15% of our students were white. HELPS is clearly an intervention that showed promise for narrowing achievement gaps, achievement disparities with students across subgroups. And this is what you see on this slide here. What was measured on our M-Class assessment at beginning of year and end of the year was the number of words read correctly on a passage. The black line at the top of the graph we'll use for comparison. That shows the percentage of all Wake County students in grades 2 through 5 who met proficiency benchmarks for oral reading fluency. That represents about 48,000 students. And by looking at the slope of that line, you see that our growth was incremental in moving students across this measure for all students, for all 48,000. However, when you look at the colored lines at the bottom of the graph, you can see that the starting point was lower, right? These students were selected strategically because we knew that they were not meeting benchmarks at the beginning of the year in fluency. So while their initial data was a huge gap from the black line at the top, we were closing gaps in fluency in the number of words read. And remember, that's Black and Hispanic students primarily. We know how to close these gaps. And when we use evidence-based programs and we have dedicated staff who make this a priority, this is how we can close achievement gaps. So you'll see here the data, again, with the black line being all students, so all African American students, all Hispanic students, all white students. And that black line is for students who did not receive this intervention. There was some growth, but it was very moderate from beginning of the year to end of the year in the percentage of students who met benchmarks. However, it is really exciting to see the opportunities for closing these learning disparities when we use an evidence-based resource such as HELPS. I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle for a moment.
So I'm really excited about this opportunity. We were actually looking forward to sharing with you about this data, and we were kind of waiting until November 14th because we were notified on that date that the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading has awarded the Wake Together effort with a National Pacesetter Award. We also have an amazing work that's happening out of Wake Up and Read, and Lori Guskowski is over here as well to help with that. We have a lot of work happening so that we can improve literacy in communities, and we have a really great program called Raising Families and Raising Readers that is also helping, or has been awarded a National Pacesetter Award. We will share more about this. We hope at an upcoming public board meeting. This is a public board meeting at a evening board meeting, so that we can celebrate, and we want to make sure that a lot of our community partners who have been a part of this work with us are here with us in that meeting. They are very aware that we're getting ready to do that, and they want to celebrate with you as we kind of move forward with that. But really excited because this is new work, but the data is panning out to be really effective, and we are excited about what this means and what could potentially be some additional outcomes. So more excitement, though. We want to talk about really what's happening in the schools. So I'm going to let Becky.
Can we pause a moment and celebrate that?
Thank you so much.
So at this time, I wanted to introduce to you the principal of Smith Magnet Elementary School, Miss Beverly Smith. She's joining us today, as well as her partner, colleague, and wonderful intervention team facilitator, Ms. Lindsay Macheski. And they're going to tell us a little bit about the work that they have done with the Wake Together partnership and share some of their story from Smith.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. Dr. Taylor, Dr. Stacy Wilson-Norman, and others. Thank you for allowing us to be here. We're excited to be here, like as she said, to kind of just share our story. So it's an exciting time. This is new work, as they mentioned. We're leading and learning together. And I'm delighted to be here with my MTSS intervention coordinator. I couldn't do this, couldn't be here without her. She's in the trenches with the teachers, doing the work. She's leading this effort. So she is my expert. So I'm here actually to support her. But we're going to kind of tell our story as we lead and learn about HELPS. 390 is the number of minutes in our school day. However, when you take into consideration other things like the Positivity Project, lunch, recess, daily world language, and specials for us as a magnet school, it leaves about 230 minutes for both core instruction and meeting individual student needs. Needless to say, as I'm sure you all know, time is very valuable for both students and for staff. So we're here to share our story and share how HELPS is worth the time investment. And this is just one of my staff members that have put in the time and the effort to help move the needle and help our students grow. Over the past year, working with HELPS, as Becky mentioned, we implemented the one-on-one program with our volunteers, as well as the small group program under the leadership of Ms. Macheski. In the HELPS one-on-one program, we had 9 volunteer tutors serving 12 students 4 days a week. At the end of the year implementing HELPS, 8% of the students met benchmark in fluency rate, and 58% were slightly below benchmark. 83% of the students met benchmark in their accuracy rate. 8% of the students made an accelerated growth rate in fluency, and 50% of our students made an accelerated growth rate in accuracy. In the HELP small group program, we have had even more gains for our students. As mentioned with the small group program, that's our staff working with our students. In this program, we had 2 instructional assistants and 3 interventionists, Ms. Macheski being one of those, serving approximately 30 students. That fluctuated in and out of groups due to enrollment changes, placement in special education services, and other factors based on the student progress data. At the end of the year implementing HELPS, 28 students were consistently served for at least a quarter or more and analyzed in our final data review. 57% of students met accelerated growth rates in fluency, and 71% of students met accelerated growth rate goals in accuracy. In comparison to 8 students who were receiving fluency interventions, but not specifically with HELPS, 38% made accelerated growth in fluency, and 50% made accelerated growth in accuracy. So as I mentioned, some of the advantages within the small group program, that included consistency with staffing. It included having a rock star leading the work like Lindsay Macheski, and a sense of urgency for us to move the needle and help our students achieve, and as they mentioned, to close those gaps. Knowledge of the program and foundational skills to support students. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my rock star who's leading the work, and she's going to continue to kind of tell you a little bit about the story at Smith and paint the beautiful picture about the work that she's leading at Smith. Let's give her a hand, Ms. Macheski.
So moreover, what impacts us, other than this accelerated growth progress data that we saw, is the human impact and response to implementing the program with staff and students. The teachers, IAs, volunteers alike complement the ease with which the program is implemented and supported, and speak frequently about the progress of their students. They came to me constantly in the halls of so-and-so just doubled their fluency rate. I was bombarded with amazing news on a daily basis. The coaching, materials, access to data after every session maximizes the impact we can have for our students with little to no preparation or burden. on our end. The daily interaction with students on their progress, reviewing their graph, allows them to buy into the program, enjoy it, celebrate their achievements on a much more frequent basis. It allowed students in our neediest subgroups to experience success. And even if not meeting the exact above accelerated average growth goal we may have had, to experience significant growth in the positive direction. In reflection, we have learned that the importance of matching this intervention with the right student at the right time in their academic day and in their academic progression of skills. As you heard earlier, time is a commodity that we all want more of with our students, and ensuring our students have access to the curriculum, the magnet programs, their core instruction, as well as their individualized needs is a realistic struggle we're still adjusting to in year 2 of our implementation. This year, we are matching more specific and appropriate students with our 3 returning one-on-one volunteers, and we're expanding our small group program by training another interventionist, our Ed Core tutor, as well as 3 teachers in grades 3-5, as well as 1 additional instructional assistant. The eagerness with which these staff members signed up to become a part of this cannot be understated. I would like to end, though, with my own personal testimony and how this program can actually impact students. I want to introduce you to a young Hispanic female student that I'll call Jane. She entered the MTSS intervention process in her 3rd grade year. Although the pandemic did impact her progress, this was not the only contribution to her struggles. She spent her 3rd through 5th grade years in an intensive decoding small group, specifically with me. By her 5th grade year, she struggled to even meet 3rd grade expectations in nonsense word decoding and 2nd grade expectations in fluency. But when given time, she could read a 4th grade level text with actually accuracy and understanding. When the decision was made to retain her in her 5th grade year, I, as an interventionist, struggled with what I would do differently and not repeat the pattern that the student had been receiving. Although her decoding in all syllable types was reaching benchmark levels, I could not figure out how to help her apply these skills with automaticity as she was reading. Then I implemented the Help Small Group program with her. The growth was insurmountable. Her fluency with a 5th grade level text grew from 39 words per minute to 98 words per minute. And her accuracy went from 91% accuracy to 98% accuracy. Moreover, her comprehension score through Maze in M class went from a 4.5 to 17.5. She exceeded growth in every universal screener, and she even met proficiency in all decoding areas. Although she still had needs going into middle school, I was no longer worried, and she had confidence that she never experienced before. After her moving up ceremony, she came up to the table where I was helping sign out the students, and she looked at me crying and simply said, "I'm ready this time. I'm excited." And I had no words but to give her a hug and tell her how proud I was of her effort and tenacity. Although I and HELPS were only a part of what supported her, this program can help others experience the same success regardless of subgroup. We do look forward very much so to continuing our work with HELPS and hope to be able to share even more successes next time we speak with you. And we really do thank you for your time allowing us to speak today.
We had 4 other staff members in training today when we came here for this meeting. They were eager, and she was leading them and talking them through that work, and they're really, really excited. They just were really excited to get started. So I'm just happy to be leading the work with them, and I'm happy to be here with her.
I just want to say, we have a whole room full of people over here that, I'm going to tell you, last year we spent hours and hours and hours just trying to kind of figure this out. And I could cry, probably might, but this is not I mean, we have a lot of work to do. I'm not saying this is the end of the road, but it is really exciting to see progress and to see that we're making a difference, and that it's accessible to many, and it's an opportunity where kids really can find some success. So that's exciting.
Well, we are certainly just overwhelmed by your work, Ms. Macheski. We see why you're called a rock star. Your story about Jane is the why for us as we serve and advocate. And so we salute you. And Principal Smith, we salute your leadership and your humility in acknowledging the work of all your educators in your building. That is a sign of a true leader, to make others feel valued and respected. So we salute you and the work that you're leading. And Ms. Johnson Hustler, your schools are being highlighted. After a conversation about District 4 or other schools, no, we absolutely are thrilled that you're doing the work that you're doing. Are there questions, Mr. Swanson?
Yes, I just want to echo Ms. Vice Chair Waters' remarks and just say this is the why. And I hope that this can be a success story that we can use to recruit other volunteers, and hopefully that we can highlight this, Dr. Taylor and Chief Luton, on our website, wherever we can. I did have one question. As relates to the North Carolina Education Corps, are the volunteer requirements different from the help requirement? Are they the same, or are they the same?
If you want to be a volunteer, you could be a volunteer with either. I don't think there's a requirement for one or the other. The participation is your willingness to attend and being able to commit to that time. There is a little bit of a heavier time commitment throughout the week at the NC Ed Corps level, as opposed to what we would do with the Wake Together. So Wake Together could be a couple of hours a week. NC Ed Corps is about 15 to 17 hours a week. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe up into the 20s.
Yes.
And for folks that are hopefully listening and are moved by this success story, where would they need to go on the website to sign up and to volunteer so we can get as many volunteers to help with?
So you will see a campaign moving forward. We do have a Wake Together website that you will be able to access. We'll make sure that is available. In addition to that, the NC Ed Corps website is available as well. We'll make sure that that's available and out there. And then again, we're hoping to do this at an evening board meeting as well to promote and really recruit more volunteers.
I hope that Smith Magnet Elementary School will be able to join us at that meeting to share the great thing.
I think it's a different story coming from youth that are leading.
Absolutely, it is. It is. We wish we could bring so many others, but, even some of the students and other teachers that are working, but it's good. It's good work, and the right people are doing the work at Smith.
Perhaps we need to take a field trip and come into your building. So,
please do.
Yeah, we'll put that out there. I saw Ms. Edmonds and Mr. Hershey.
Yeah, Ms. Woodson, you talked about the NC Ed Corps. What can you explain to me? What does full capacity mean at 44 tutors at 22 schools? And you said that the district pays them. How do we pay them, and is that a barrier for us? Like, could we have more if we had more fun? Like, tell me more about that, please.
Correct. So the capacity is about the capacity we have for funding, that we have set aside dollars in order to pay for those tutors. So it is about allotting dollars towards that for that effort. And we have used different funding sources over the last 3 years, but depending on what was available at the time and how widely we could recruit and retain. So that is where that's why we have the cap as well. And the funding, we have allotted those dollars for this current year. We'll have to make some decisions about what we do for the 24-25 school.
Is it a grant? Is it local?
It is coming out of our dollars, and so this year, this particular year, I think it was a fund balance appropriation.
Okay.
Does that sound, I think that's correct.
And then I have a couple more, if I may. Do you have any hints for this first semester from the HELPS program? I know y'all are too eager to see if the trend is continuing.
Is it continuing?
So I just wondered, since we are almost at the halfway mark of the 2023-24 school year, I didn't know if you had any.
So we have the schools that we're continuing, so we're still getting training for some of those new schools. Schools that we're continuing are in the midst of that. We do our universal screening happens beginning of the year when kids first get there, and then at the first quarter. I think we're tracking that. I don't know that we have pulled the data specifically around this yet at this point, but we are continuing to monitor that progress. Something that Lindsay mentioned, which is perfect, that I think is a great part of this structure, and it's really good. It's good for anything, and that is part of what a student gets to do is they get to graph their own progress. So they have a chart, they can use a crayon, they can use a, whatever they're using, and they can say, today I was able to read 74 words per minute, and then next week I read 78 words per minute. And it gives you that, your own
Confidence.
ability to be able to progress how you're doing along the way.
Great.
And my last question is, in the last presentation, we were talking about the summer reading program is only 12 days long, and I didn't know if there was a way that, because the HELPS model seems to be so successful, if there's a way to scale that for the summer program, totally recognizing it's a much, I don't know that it can be, but have y'all talked about that?
So I can partner with Sarita on this. The reality is it certainly could be a component of it. Much of what we know that is trying to find who are the right students for this intervention. And many times the students that are qualifying for Read to Achieve are students that might still need those early literacy skills, and it's some of the need that we have that's prior to the point at which you're ready for a fluency intervention. Would you add to that?
Thank you.
Is there any peer-to-peer tutoring aspect to these programs?
Okay.
Like where you use fourth or fifth graders that could serve as role models for younger students?
We're not using that particular model right now. As I said, the one-on-one is with volunteers that the district hires, and then the small group is with trained staff in our building.
I didn't know if that was something that was ever considered to...
I think that there are individual schools that do that. As a matter of fact, I talked to a principal at one of our high schools this morning who does use a peer-to-peer model with juniors and seniors who are tutoring some of what we talked about in the last presentation, some sophomores or freshmen that might have skills that they need support in, and they do that during Smart Lunch or at other times during the day. So I do think we have some individual models with that. I don't know of a specific scaled model that we have in place with that.
But we're looking at the beginning when I talked about a tutoring hub. That's a component that we want to bring in place for our high school students to be able to do some tutoring across the district. So we have some things that we have to work out with logistics and legal pieces, but we want to be able to use some of our really gifted students to be able to help, because the issue is the need is greater than the volunteers that we have.
Right.
But we have students that we can train, and we've seen other models in other districts that we want to scale up and use. So when we think about that tutoring hub, that's actually a button on the front that we just haven't built out yet.
Well, I also think about it from the role model perspective, that you can really have a young kid who's struggling, even if they've seen a role model in their own school who's coming to school every day, and now it feels good to learn how to read, or read better at school, it's however they think about it. But I think sometimes we, not necessarily here, but the importance of a role model. And even if the role model doesn't know they're a role model, sometimes they're just seeing it, and just a way to impact our younger kids. That's all I have.
Okay, Ms. Caulfield, and then Chair Haggard.
So I have a question first, and then I have a comment. What makes one qualify for the program?
So each program that I mentioned, it would be a different criteria. It depends on what we're focusing on. So the NCN core, we're really looking at K2 students and their score and M-class on those early literacy skills that will tell us that they are at risk. So you were talking about thresholds. There are recommended thresholds about where a student is proficient or not proficient or at benchmark, and those indicators let us know who we want to focus on. The same thing for math. We have another universal screener that does the same. So different tools tell us different pieces of information based on what we see the need for the student is. So in general, we're looking at that, what we call formative assessment data, that helps us be able to make a decision about how we provide instruction next to support those students.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to I love this program. My son did this when he was in 3rd grade, and I volunteered in the classroom. And you just see these kids' faces light up when they're like, oh, they got that aha moment, and they figure it out, and then they get excited to read. So I actually got a little emotional when you were sharing the story, so thank you, because you really do see these kids, like, they try, and they want to learn, they want to read, they see all those colorful pictures, they want to know what's in the story, but they struggle when they can't get that little bit of information, and that this really connects it. And the program is wonderful, and I've watched it not only with my own son, but the kids in the classroom, and I'm just so excited that it's coming, and I hope that we continue to put that in as many classrooms as we can, because I think it's a great program. So, thank you, and thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Michelle, the link to the volunteers live on the homepage.
Perfect. So it is on the homepage right now. Thank you for that.
And Chair Haggerty?
Thank you, Vice Chair Waters. So when this program launched, this was one of the most ambitious undertakings in North Carolina. Let's just be clear about that. And like any really large enterprise, it had a lot of challenges. But now, this far into it, we've seen the progress, and I noted up there that you said the WakeEd partnership was taking an expanded role. I know that before we had the curriculum down, we had the staff down, but things like recruiting and training so many different people from all over the place was really challenging. How's the program evolved from the beginning to now, and is WakeEd Partnership a part of that?
So WakeEd Partnership is a part of that. We are really excited about that because they are our community partner. They are our partner in how we reach out and how we can support internally, right? So we are working with WakeEd Partnership, and they are assigning a specific person who's going to focus specifically on volunteer management, recruitment. How do we place and how do we make sure that schools are assigned to those tutors? We are really excited about that partnership, and of course their relationship that they have across Wake County with many other community partners will only help us become stronger. And we want to think about certainly some of our larger partners that we currently have relationships with, but there are many, many community partners that are small entities that work in communities that don't have the opportunities that are available, and we think that this connection with WakeEd Partnership will only afford those individuals opportunities to jump into this space as well.
Great, wonderful.
Yeah, so I attended that Wake Up and Read thing a few weeks ago. It was very, very inspiring, and especially talking about how even the parents got into it and wanting to, for the parents who are not truly proficient with reading, that they actually got motivated to learn to read, and so that was really, remarkable that outreach to the community in more ways than just the students, even involved parents themselves. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Well, we have, that's from our superintendent, Dr. Taylor.
So I want to thank Dr. Stacy Wilson and the academic department for what you guys are doing. And Dr. Amy, as you said, we had Wake Up and Read, we saw the data and saw the passion that was there. But Principal Smith, I want to thank you and your staff for the work that you do. And I want you to know is that this is what I call educational leadership, instructional leadership. That's what I'm always looking for in schools, and you're modeling what it is that is going to be effective. So I want the board to think about what they said in terms of the instructional minutes in the day. So you talk about 390. You look at all the things that take place in school, in elementary school. This is the most difficult part when you have to focus on instructional minutes. You're able to bring in high-quality volunteers that are trained. This is what I see as an enhancement to the instructional minutes that you don't have. So this is important. Just know you're modeling what I'm looking for. So this is being recorded. I hope other students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I do appreciate everyone's time and attention this afternoon, and I want to recognize Wake Up and Read and all those books that you send home for our children to have in their home libraries. And so this is certainly a collaborative effort, and we recognize the work of those who are in the room. Mr. Cook, you see you made it out of the jury duty. Recognize the work of everyone in the in the room. And I would like to make a note that our next meeting is scheduled for January 3rd, but we have a little bit of concern about being able to do that. So we plan to look for another date that gives us all a little bit more time to recover from the holiday season. So with that being said, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank